I'm here to tell you that I believe that the money that people give to your church directly reflects how God is moving. And if you use some of the techniques that I'm going to talk about today, you're going to be able to compare what the norm is to what your church is, and you're going to be able to, in a methodical way, show some data to your congregation that might help them to decide to become givers. As you know, I was vice president of development here at the university for a number of years, and I wrote an article in the Tower Alumni Magazine one year that I'm going to read to you as a way of starting. I was never afraid to ask for money. Now, don't ask me why, but I believe it was God. I started out on the music faculty as adjunct in 1985. I was in full-time Christian ministry. 1998, they said we need a chairman of the music department. So in 1998, I became chairman of the music department, resurrected the music department at the university. 2 years after that, I became chairman of the humanities division. 3 years after that, I became associate dean for academic assessment. That's why I like data. And then finally vice president. And I was only here 13 years full time, so it was kind of like a whirlwind. But I learned the hard way how to fundraise, because if you're a musician, nobody hands you money. And nobody hands the music department money at a university. You have to go out and find ways to get it. And I raised a lot of money here while I was chairman of the music department. That's why they came after me to be vice president. This is a letter I wrote in the Tower magazine, which is an alumni magazine. The purpose of this letter was to encourage them to give again and to thank them for giving. The title of the letter was To Infinity and Beyond. You recognize that? Buzz Lightyear is the subtitle. What a wonderful and whimsical motto for a toy. But if a Christian seriously thinks about it, why shouldn't we have the same mindset? We know we're headed for eternity. In fact, we've already started our eternal journey. Just as Buzz Lightyear evokes another episode by his call to infinity and beyond, the Christian must awake each day with an attitude of forever and ever. Each day is like a theatrical encore, a new and exciting revelation from God. G.K. Chesterton says it in this way. Do you all know who G.K. Chesterton is? If you don't read him, you should be reading him. This comes from his book, Orthodoxy. He's the man who converted C.S. Lewis to Christianity. Very persuasive man. He wrote, "Children want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, 'Do it again.' And the grown-up person, us, does it again until he's nearly dead. For grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony. But perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, 'Do it again' to the sun. And every evening, 'Do it again' to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, every day, but has never gotten tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. Are you strong enough to exult in monotony? For instance, do you get tired of giving? Do you get tired of people asking you to give? Perhaps we should never tire of giving. Perhaps we should say, let's give again when letters like this come in the mail. It could be that this is a lesson well learned as we prepare for our heavenly eternal abode. I will certainly never tire of asking you to give to Oakwood, and I'm sure that Oakwood will always need your gift. This is God's way, and I love it. Therefore, let me thank you in advance for the way you repeatedly support Oakwood, our mission, and our students. Without your repeated support of the Oakwood Annual Fund, we would not be where we are today, and we would not be able to achieve our goals for tomorrow. Please consider doing it again and stand with us yet again this year. Your support makes it possible for us to continue to be good stewards of the momentum God has provided during this wonderful period of growth and renewal. Sincerely, Randy Thompson. And you'd be surprised that even though it was just a thank you letter in the tower, people wrote and gave and noted because of the letter. I'm doing it again. So, what we're going to talk today about, or what our purpose is really to help you fund your vision. And in doing so, how to deal with donors and donations. We're going to be discussing faith and giving. We're going to be discussing structuring the giving plan, model church fundraising program, the Donor Bill of Rights, and the joy of giving. Now, I will probably only speak about the top four. The Donor Bill of Rights is just a document for you to look at. You're going to see it in the presentation today. And the joy of giving is something I took from this book, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising. This is the premier book written by the Giving School at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indiana, in Indianapolis. And that's where I became a certified fundraising manager. And at the end of the session today, Leanne has copies of every page of my presentation. It's yours, complete with the links and everything to take, but you have to get it from you got it back there. She's got them back there. Good. So let's get started. Faith and giving. Faith, as you know, has undergirded philanthropy since the beginning, because it was the church and the Hebrews that said, give 10%. Why? Because we need to be loving our neighbors, we need to help the poor, and we need to help those who are physically in need and spiritually in need. Faith has always undergirded it. Philanthropy and parachurch organizations have taken that over somewhat, but the initial foundation of it was in faith. So much so that among religious institutions at its height, their giving in churches accounted for 57% of all philanthropic giving. More than half of all dollars given were given to the church, not other philanthropic needs. That's important to remember. Unfortunately, I think you might all be aware that has significantly dropped off and now sits at under 30%. Something is not right. If God is moving in the church, money should be moving with it. So as you look at your church finances, you're really looking at how is God moving in your church. So what I'm really going to be talking about today is not so much managing donors or managing donations, but analyzing donors and analyzing donations, because you need to know what it means. You need to know where your church is, where it should be. You don't know that in a vacuum, do you? But you can know it. So, making sense of the religious giving sector, we're down to under 30% of charitable giving. The shifts have taken place to the point that right now, 1 in every 5 Christians give nothing to the church. 20% of all Christians give nothing to the church. But religious congregations who are successful have learned that the best way to get people's attention is to segment the congregation. That is, look at the social groups of your congregation. Look at the giving groups in your congregation. Find out who they are. Find out why they're giving, why they're not giving. And then find ways to help them move, make a move in the right direction. You might be shocked to find out, I hope you're shocked at this, that among all American households in churches, only 2.6% of the members of churches give 10% to the church. That's a shockingly low amount. 3.1% give between 5 and 10% of their income. 9% give 2 to 5% of their income. 86% of all Christians give less than 2% of their income to the church. We can do better than that. And God is surely calling us to do better than that. And He's moving and we're not listening. What are the obstacles? People have misperceptions, particularly in our society. People think they have to have a certain amount of wealth to be secure. So the number one reason why people don't give is wealth insecurity. They're afraid that their wealth is going to get eroded. But the truth is that most people have more than they need. They just don't know that they have more than they need because they don't know how much they need. They think it's always how much the other person has. Obstacle number 2 is giving illiteracy, and I hope that with the information that I'm going to give you in just a few minutes, that you can help alleviate some of that illiteracy. Obstacle number 3, and the most common one, is what we call comfortable guilt. That is, they give just enough that they don't feel guilty. Okay? Now, that's a bad thing, but it's doubly bad because it means that something in the church is making them feel guilty. Is that right? Research has shown that if you can show people how much joy they can receive from giving, they'll give much more. If you can show people that they'll be healthier physically, they'll give more. If you can show that they'll be healthy psychologically, they'll give more. Well, that's the actual truth. They will be happier if they give more. The more you give, the happier you are. Because, number 1, you must feel like you have enough if you're given more. It gives the person the answer they're seeking. Am I giving enough? And when they're able to give more and they're still able to live, it answers the question of, do I have enough money? Obviously you do, because you're surviving. But if you don't give them that chance, they never learn the lesson. They're missing out on a whole lot that you could give them. So structuring a giving plan really revolves, in my opinion, and this is coming from someone. I was a development director in a church, and I was the development vice president here at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. this is all in the last 15 years, and I was executive director of the OK Mozart International Music Festival. So I raised a lot of money. I used basically two tools, the fundraising pyramid and the gift range chart. The fundraising pyramid is a snapshot of your church, and you all should make a fundraising pyramid about your church's pattern of giving. You can get that information simply by asking the person who enters gifts to give you the total amount of money that people give in categories. In other words, what's the most amount of money somebody gives in our church? What's the next amount? What's the next amount? All the way down to the bottom, and then put them in categories. And the categories are basically following this rule that has now been proven to be true for about 20 years, and that is 20% of the people give 80% of the money. So your giving pattern should be somewhere in that neighborhood. And if it's not, then there's something wrong with your giving pattern. So, the base of the pyramid can consist of people who give one time a year, maybe to a special offering, or don't give anything. Why are they the base of the pyramid? Because they're at the bottom level. They can't go anywhere but up or out. And your goal is to move them from the bottom level to the next level, and then to the next level, and then to the next level, and to do it with joy, not a mandate. To do it with joy. Help them understand they have a cause and they're making a difference. Then you have sporadic donors. They may give quarterly, but it's in small amounts of money, so it doesn't add up to a whole bunch. Then you have the members who are giving recurring gifts and the totals. Then you have, now in the case of, this chart came from the fact that the money I was raising at Oklahoma Wesleyan University was for the annual fund. The annual fund was a part of the total budget, but it was a specific job for me to raise somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 for the annual fund. And so I always tracked the people who gave to the annual fund. In your case, you're going to have probably a yearly budget, a one time a year budget, and you can simply call that whatever you call your fund every year. You can put them in that category. They're not quite major gifts yet. A major gift is something you decide as a church. What do you do? Let's have a show of hands. What would you consider a major gift at your church? Do you have any idea?
The kitchen remodel?
No, an amount of money.
We had somebody give $100,000 last year. In fact, I did.
That would definitely be a major gift.
Okay.
Anybody else have an idea of what a major gift is?
Somebody passing away and leaving their
That's planned giving.
and
That's planned giving. Okay.
We consider anything over 25,000.
Most churches will have categories, and you can find this out because you're going to do this for your church. I'm going to show you how to do it. Most churches will have $5,000 as a major gift. 5,000 and above, maybe a major gift. Then $1,000, and then 500, then 200, and 100, and less. Remember, only 2.8% of the people give 10% of their money to the church. So most of your people are going to be not in the $25,000 neighborhood, because that's somebody who's got a $250,000 income. They're giving 10%. So you go through with your financial secretary what the giving in your church is, and you put them in these categories with amounts. Now, one-time donors, if they give $5,000, they should still go up into the one of the top categories because they've given a lot of money. You're talking about money, people in this category who are not giving much money. You want people that are gonna move up the pyramid. So the idea here is that you are not writing off the people who don't give money. They're an important statistic in your church. And they are the group of people that you need to work the hardest on. When I was the development director of a local church, I called every person who never gave and asked them if they would give $5 a week. And they did it. You know how much money that is? $250 a year. And I went back the next year and said, can you give me $7 a week? $350. You're moving them up the pyramid. Most of those people in that bottom category just don't have an idea how much money they should be giving. They have no idea. They have some lofty idea that everybody else in the church is giving all this much money and they can't possibly match it. Their gift won't make a difference. And it does make a difference. It makes a difference to them and it makes a difference to the kingdom. So that's the group you need to be really working on. You need to get them to be regular donors. That's why I asked those people to make $5 a week. I didn't ask them for $250 a year. $5 a week. Why? So that they would give regularly. Get a habit formed. Then I wrote them a thank you note at the bottom of their receipt every month. We all send out monthly statements or quarterly statements. On the bottom of the statement I wrote, thank you so much. God is happy with you, Randy. Or if I persuaded them with a particular ministry, I would say something like, you have really helped this ministry to flourish. Your dollars are really at work. Thanking them is so important. How many of you get involved in thanking people for money at all? Wonderful. How do you do it? Handwritten is the best. A reproduced image with your signature at the bottom is good, but it's not the best. The best thing is a brief handwritten note that they know you took the time to do personally. This is the beginning of building a trust with the donor. Trust means everything because donors are very suspicious of where their money goes, particularly in the church. They don't like the idea of paying your salary. They want their money to go to ministry, not to you. They have the same feeling about me too, so don't take it personally. So you've got to have plenty of ways to give, plenty of ministries to give to, and ways that you track it, that you can keep them informed about. Then, now you've got information on the giving levels of your church, amounts of money. And this is how we're going to use it. We're going to use it in what's called a gifts range chart. A gifts range chart is a chart that determines the amount of money needed and whether it's achievable. In other words, you and the board have decided that you want to raise $400,000 a year, for instance. You need to figure out how to do that and whether it's doable in your congregation. The first thing you have to do is make a gifts range chart for where your church is at right now. So you take the information from the fundraising pyramid, the people that are on the bottom, people on the other stages, and you build a gifts range chart. The finished one looks something like this. This chart had the goal of raising $100,000, so you could easily take this chart and just multiply every section by 4, and you've got what you need. This is built on a statistic that has stood solid for 20 years, as I said earlier, and that is 20% of your people will give 80% of the money. So you take the highest amount of money that's given, this is building this chart for where your church is giving right now, not something futurized, but where it's giving right now. What's the largest amount of money that's given to your church? How many gifts are there? You fill that in. Then you go down until you get to 80%. And then you stop. And then everybody else goes in the 20% category. Okay? And then you'll see how that, if you just take these two categories and summarize them over here or add them together, you'll see how you raised your $100,000. Because 2 gifts at $5,000 is $10,000. 6 gifts at $2,500 is $25,000. That's 8 gifts. So 6 gifts. 18 gifts at $1,000 is $18,000. I got that wrong. It's this column here, per range. So forth and so on. And look, down here, the people who are in the 20%, who are giving under $100, takes 412 of those people, where the total above that is far smaller. But this is 412 people who can move up the fundraising ladder. You're getting the importance of these people. You may think, oh, there are people doing it all. That's true. But they're not going to be there forever. You have to have people constantly moving up this thing to keep your finances going, or it's going to drop off and you'll be in emergency mode. This is the most important group of people in your church. That's where your future lies. The people that are in the bottom 20%. So how do we structure the church plan? What does a model church plan look like? Well, in order to answer that question, you need to go to research, because you're probably not going to ask people, why did you stop giving? You might have the nerve to do that, but you don't really want to know personally. They might say because of you. It might be kind of a dangerous question. So you go to research, and I've got all this for you in the handout that Leanne has. The number one reason that people give is they can't afford it. That's that wealth effect that I was talking about. They're afraid they don't have enough money. They're afraid to give any of it away. They don't understand that they have enough. And they won't understand that they have enough until they start giving something and realize, it's okay. I'm still alive. I do have enough. Maybe I can even give more. The other one is that, and this is kind of a ploy, they say, oh, we're giving to other charities. Well, maybe. Maybe not. The other one is, and this is the important one, their gift is never acknowledged. What do I mean by acknowledged? They get a statement, but that's not acknowledgement. That's a receipt. And acknowledgement is where a person acknowledges your gift, says thank you for your gift. That's probably the most important thing you can do. And I know that pastors can be very afraid to talk about money or to give people the impression that you know how much they're giving. That can be a really scary thing. But you do need to know. Don't be afraid of it. This is their spiritual life. This is what you're called to. And if you're not involved in the way they're giving, you're missing a huge chunk of where they can grow as a Christian, where they can find happiness and joy in sharing. You need to be involved in this process. The other people are basically, they just don't pay attention. When fundraising day comes, you know, you're giving your report and saying how much money you're gonna need, they just don't pay any attention to it, don't realize what the ministries are. And, those are the people, that's one of the main reasons you need to go to some people face to face and explain this to them, so that they really know what's going on. Finally, people don't give because the reason they gave was not honored by the church. That's a very, very important one. You have to show people, if they have given money and they didn't want to give it to the general fund, but there's a ministry in the church that they wanted to give to, a mission project or whatever, and they put that on their check, you better make sure in your acknowledgement that you thank them for giving to that ministry and share with them something about what their money did. And then they might have the nerve later on to begin giving to the general fund, which is your salary. Okay? So those are all very, very important things. Support causes that are important to the donors, demonstrate to donors how the need is being addressed, thank donors, acknowledge what the donor's gift is doing, communicate with donors, and honor donors' intentions. Those are very, very important. And then build a clear shared goal. And what that means, and this is a way to move towards the first end of alleviating the reasons why donors stop giving. If you build a clear shared goal before your budget is presented, there's going to be more buy-in. And what do I mean by that? You might consider the possibility of a church-wide survey, and I've given you a link in that pile of paper back there that gives you surveys that have already been developed, so you don't have to develop one. It gives donors a chance to indicate what they're really interested in. That's important feedback. It's important because they have to have some kind of buy-in. If you do that ahead of time, whether their ministry is included or not, they feel like they've had something to say in the process. Very, very important. Also, don't just talk about the need, show it. What I mean there is, if you can get someone from one of the ministries that your church supports, and you all do this with missions, for instance. You bring a missionary in and they talk about it. But what if you give to the homeless shelter? Bring a person in from your community, not a missionary. Bring somebody in from your community that you're helping and work with them on a little presentation that they can give to share what that money has done for them. And you're going to begin to touch people's hearts. And God will move through that. Continually focus on the donor's role. And what I mean there is, make sure that they know that they stack up somewhere on that pyramid. It's up to you to teach them something about how church giving works, how keeping the church alive works. You need to be moving people up that pyramid. They need to know something about the fundraising pyramid of your church. They will know where they are on that chart. You don't have to tell them. That's the beauty of it. If that's my gift to you. They will know where they stand, and that is all they need to know. Because one of the reasons they don't give is they don't know where they stack up. I doubt that not two people in the church know what each other are giving. And they don't need to know who they are, but they need to know where their gift stacks up to the total picture of your church. And they'll see it amounts to something, because they'll see down there, Oh, well, there are 400 other people giving, and look how much we total up to. Man, that's a lot of money. It suddenly looks like their gift counts. So take that information that you get, use it. That's what I'm calling analyzing donations. You're not actually analyzing the donor per se, you're not calling the donor by name, but you're putting out there how your church raises money. What do people give? Here it is. Can you imagine? It just clears the air. It clears the air. And you don't have to be the one telling them. But they know then what they need to do, and you can help them. Provide different giving options. Now, I'm talking here about you can give online, you can write a check, all PayPal, all this kind of stuff. But also, importantly, is different things to give to. Not every donor is going to want to come in on that drive that you have every year, but they might come in on one of the options. And so if you're continually throwing out all the ministries that you're doing, not just one or two, but everything, really giving people a picture of all the work that the money is doing, they may decide to give to one of those options that's actually part of the bigger picture. And it's okay to do that. Just make sure when you acknowledge the gift that you acknowledge that they've given to that gift. Figure out how your donors want to communicate. Do they want letters? Do they want texts? Do they want emails? Do they want phone calls? Do they want visits? You'll be surprised, some people really do want you to come and visit and talk about money. And you might be surprised why. It might be something really good. It could be. So you want to make sure you do that. Say thank you often. Keep donors updated often. And you can do that various means. You can do it from the pulpit very quickly. Some of the ministries that your church supports can work into a sermon very nicely, and you just simply report on it. Here's the biblical mandate. Here's what our budget is doing, and here are some results. Honor the wishes of your donors, and report your finances. And that is, on a regular basis, somebody ought to say to the congregation, here's our total budget, here's what we've raised so far, and here's how much we've spent. Doesn't have to be much more than that. But keep them involved. Then if they have specific questions, you can give them specific answers, but you need to report. All of this adds up to the fact that you're building trust with your congregation. And trust is one of the important components, one of the more important reasons why a person will give. They have to not only believe in the mission, they have to believe that their money is going to go where you say it's going to go, or where they say it's going to go. And if you don't do that, distrust develops, and you're going to lose a donor. Always keep in the forefront of your mind trustworthiness. We've got to keep our word. And if you're falling behind, be honest about it. Adjust the budget, but do it together. Don't, you've got God on your side. He's the one that's helping with all the momentum, so you don't have to worry about other stuff. Okay. I'm moving along faster this time, thank goodness. Do you all have any questions about the fundraising pyramid or the gifts range chart? Do you see how it can be useful in your church? How many people think it could be helpful? How many people think you could do it? Maybe not. You really can. It's just a matter of getting a list of the amounts of money. You don't need to know the names, just a list of the amounts of money. At least you find out who is giving the smallest amounts of money and who you can move up the ladder easier. But you can move people from any level. Your goal is to move people from each level to the next level eventually. And then on to the next, and then finally to leave a planned gift to the church in the end. A donor bill of rights, this is one that's been developed by 4 of the national philanthropic institutions in the United States. And it is something that should be incorporated in your vision as a promise about how you're going to treat your donors and their donations at your church. And I present it to you because it's standardized. It's not something that you have to come out and work up on your own. This is the standard, and people need to know what the standard was. I would say, in terms of the donor bill of rights too, probably the most important thing you can do as a congregation is to build a giving policy statement. How many of you have a giving policy statement in your church? That a giving policy statement tells people what they can and can't give a gift to. We had a policy statement here at the university, and we quickly developed it because we had a donor that wanted to give us what's called a closely held stock. And the more I researched what a closely held stock was, I became convinced that we were never going to see a dime. A closely held stock is stock that is 90% owned by one person. It's not on the stock exchange, it's a family business. And it has no legal standing. So we had to create a policy so that we could say to them, we don't accept closely held stock. Okay? Because we would have to reflect on our books what they said the value was, and it was going to skew our books completely off. You're going to find people might want to give a rug or a sofa, or you automatically say no to those things, but you need a policy. The policies should include what unrestricted gifts they give, that is, money that they give that they don't attach any wires to it. And then what designated gifts can they give? What funds do you officially approve of that your church has established that they can give to and that counts as a gift to the church? That should be in a policy somewhere, because there's no way you can really challenge a donor unless you have a policy. You need to have a policy on the benevolence fund, how it's used, who can use it. Building and grounds fund, what's fixed? What does that mean? Outside, inside? What does it mean? Property fund, what does it mean? Missions fund, what missions? How do we give to it? What do they do? A ministry fund, that's a fund in most churches that helps with the education of a pastor or somebody on staff. It needs to have a policy. You need to have a policy on love offerings, memorial funds. You need to have a policy on what your fiscal year is, how financial records are kept, how financial records are reported, how financial records are reviewed, what fundraising events the church approves of in advance so that you're not surprised, how funds are dispersed, what church bank accounts you have, what reserve funds you have, what property and liability insurance you have, how is it used. I've got the list for you, something you really need to do. And you can Google giving policy statements, and you'll actually find some that come up, and you can use those. All right. So, finally, the joy of giving. There are actually psychological benefits to giving. Many of us believe that we would be happier if we had more time and money, but research shows the opposite. Giving away our time and money makes us happier. When used together, that is giving money and time, volunteering in the church and giving money, they're essential ingredients to happiness and giving. The time ask effect, that is, if you ask a person to give, they're more likely to give. But that many people have to be asked directly. When you ask them, they'll give more. There's a psychological effect. If you let them make their own choice or leave it up to them, they can't make a decision. It's important to actually make an ask. When people are first asked to give money, they give less time and money. But if they're asked to volunteer first, they'll give money usually along with it. So find the people who are volunteering in your church who aren't giving, and they're the first people you should ask to give, because they now have an investment in the church with their time. They'll move up to prospects in your chart if you ask them. The self-focus is not activated when people are asked to give small amounts of money, $5 or $20, on others instead of themselves. This activates the joy of giving and can be built. If you understand what I'm saying there, it means the self-focus. They're not thinking of self when you ask them to give $5. It takes that whole equation out about their money. It takes it out. So if you ask for small amounts of money for donors who don't give, that's out of the picture, and they will generally give. I think I've given you examples of that. Just recalling giving to someone else boosts their mood. Giving is also associated with long-lasting good feelings. More importantly, these happiness boosts are noticeable by outside people. This is research done by the Pew Foundation, by the way. It's reliable. Giving can also make the giver feel richer. It puts money in context. They feel better off than average because they can give and they still have enough. You following that one? Giving time leads to feelings of time affluence. The subjective feeling of having a lot of free time because you've got time to volunteer. It does something positive in you. Makes you feel like you've got a lot of time. Ask people to volunteer. Even among those who have ongoing psychological problems such as PTSD or social anxiety, giving can help and has helped to manage those symptoms. Those people go out and volunteer, they give money, they get into some kind of helping situation, and they're better off. They can manage the PTSD symptoms. The joy of giving and volunteering can also spread to other people, so it has a social aspect to it. It especially spreads to closest friends, family members, and their broader social networks. It can help to give people a sense that they're important and needed, which can help to buffer them from the stresses of aging, particularly, including losing important social relationships. So it helps people maintain equilibrium along with aging, because a lot of things happen in aging. I have been leading grief support groups in our church for quite some time, and the people in the group who are older, who are also people who give, manage much better through grief than people who are not affiliated with the church or people who don't give to something. There's a direct relationship. Donating money activates the pleasure reward centers of the brain as much as receiving money. This leads to lower cortisol. This is all good stuff for your sermons, by the way, that's why I put it in there for you. With religious people, these factors are even greater because they affirm their most cherished beliefs to help and serve other people. Okay, so I want to say one last thing to you. I've got a link in the presentation back there that will show you software to manage the money in the church. And some of this software is free. So if your church does not have any software, be sure to go to that link and you'll be able to get some help. So let's just review a little bit here. The reason that you need to get involved with the giving process in your church is because you're the person that has a thumb on the spiritual growth and the spiritual health of your church, and you're the person that needs to have that. And if you don't have the financial information, you don't know what's really going on in your church. You know the surface. Money tells the rest of the picture. Not money, giving. Giving tells the rest of the picture. You have two tools to use: the fundraising pyramid, understanding that people, even the people who don't give, are important to the church because they're your next generation of givers. And that's how you get people moving constantly up that pyramid. Takes some pressure off of you, has some pressure in the meantime to help them move up, and ultimately you're doing a favor to the church. The gift range chart helps you to understand the 80-20 principle. It helps you to see on paper that 80% of the money actually is coming from 20% of the people. And that in a church, that might not be acceptable. It might be acceptable in other institutions, but maybe not. Maybe that's not the way God intended it in a church. Maybe it should be more evenly distributed. That's for you to decide in your church. But you have the data to make a decision one way or another on it. Anybody have any questions? Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.